Good evening, everyone. Yes, so I'm speaking as a clinician. I'm a gastroenterologist and general physician at Austin Health, and I also have another role looking after medical education at Austin Health as well, and also our MD research students at the Austin Clinical School. In the college, I'm on the RACP's College Policy and Advocacy Council Executive Committee and the written exam panel as well. So today we'll cover a few things. Austin led the statewide rollout of Choosing Wisely in Victoria, and so we had learned quite a lot of lessons from doing that. So I'll show you some of the lessons that was learned from that statewide rollout. I'd like to acknowledge Safer Care Victoria, which provided the $1.5 million for that sort of scale-up collaboration. I'll also talk about, with my education hat on, some of the social learning and collaboration opportunities that we've been doing with various platforms, including Microsoft Teams, which a lot of hospitals are using in the COVID-19 era. And then thirdly, I'll talk about some of the experiential learning and virtual patient research that we've been doing based on a PMCV grant, as well as an Austin Medical Research Foundation grant. And also some of the consumer education. So Austin's leading the whole Northeast Corridor Public Health Unit, and it's an exciting time for us to really think about using this, not just for COVID, but in the future for public health and choosing wisely and the RACP Evolve process. So this comes from the RACGP, but if you want to think about various ways that we can help the patient, we can think about the clinical team and its resources and culture, the organisation with its additional infrastructure and policies in the system as well. So if you think about it all sort of in those sort of categories as I go through my talks, that would be quite useful. So Austin is the champion site for the Choosing Wisely National Prescribing Service Initiative. And obviously, if you haven't heard before, it's about the right treatment and right management for the right patient. It's about evidence-based care, which sounds simple, but indeed there are lots and lots of complexities in terms of patient care to actually make this happen. We actually started thanks to a group of our Choosing Wisely clinical leads at Austin Health, which included Simon Judkins and Michael Yeo from Emergency, and Andrew Huang and Belinda Yeo. A group of us were clinical leads within our health service. And what we found really worked was an interdisciplinary steering committee, included nursing and allied health. And we had support right through to the board level for this. And the success was then built when we got our second sort of Better Care Victoria grant, where we were able to, or we were given the task of actually leading the rollout of what we did at Austin Health to all these metro centres. As you can see, Northern, Eastern, St. Vi's, Western Monash Peninsula, Royal Children, but not only metro centres, also to regional areas as well. Albury, Ballarat, Goulburn Valley, Latrobe Regional, Swan Hill. I found it I learned a lot through that process in terms of resourcing that project. We worked very collaboratively with the Department of Health. And as with any large project like this, it often does boil down to money. So initially, the funding was for about $500,000, but that would only fund a project officer at each of these sites. The project officer being someone who would just would coordinate the projects. But in our heart of hearts, we knew that this had to be a clinician-led process. Same as Evolve, if I'm as a clinician, if I'm sort of doing my work on the wards or in outpatients or in the community, and there is a message that comes to me that says we need to evolve or choose wisely, I find it often very useful that if there is a clinical slant to it. The thing that we really strongly said was that the last thing you want to tell a clinician is that they have to, save money or, do more with less. But if you say to a clinician, hey, we need you to look after patients in a better way. How about thinking about improving the way your clinical acumen or the way you order tests and manage patients? What's the evidence? Let's discuss that. And it comes, and it's being led by clinicians within various departments with content expertise. Then that's where you get real buy-in. And so that's why we worked with the Department of Health with this funding model and the budgeting for this to raise it to that 1.5 million mark, so that we had clinical leads at each of these sites, and that is paying for a consultant 0.1 to 0.2 EFT for that. Indeed, for our Austin initial local rollout, we had 0.3 EFT in terms of clinical leads to help with this. I have little points up here. So we acted almost like a base camp. We had various forums and toolkits, but it wasn't just us. In fact, what we brought to the table was nothing or very minimal compared to what the whole collaborative group wisdom that we got from others. Every health service had their own great, wonderful ideas, and that sharing was just absolutely amazing. There was direct support, and it was also a collaboration clinical lead as well, just to try and coordinate all this. So these are the results. This was just released by the government just before COVID hit, and very good timing, because COVID really strongly told us why we had to all choose wisely or evolve. 11 health services. There were 28 low-value care practices. And in terms of different categories, mainly in imaging and pathology, and there's one in prescribing, across a variety of acute and subacute departments within these hospitals, including aged care and rehab. And in just over 4 months, there was a 33% decrease in low-value care. Now, this is a 120-page document, so there's lots of fascinating stats and maths and so forth, but I know it's late, so I'll cut to the chase about what the results showed. So there were some key recommendations from that from the evaluation, and the whole program was evaluated by an outside body, and knowledge improvement was quite varied. And I'll touch upon why that could be the case when I go through some of the educational rollouts that we've piloted and tried. What's worked and most importantly, what doesn't work. Engagement overall was very high, and most agreed that this need for us to do the right thing by our patients in terms of right tests and right treatments is a clinician's responsibility. These are the 5 questions that we want to have patients always ask. Do I need this test? What are the risks? Are there other options? What happens if I don't do anything? That knowledge increasing consumers by a substantial amount. Now the cost, as I said, we had this ethos of not saying we're doing this to save money, even though it actually does save a lot of money. These actually cost analyses were done based purely on the test cost. And this does not include the time that you take to order a test, the time to check it, the reagents, the time of the technician in the lab analyzing the test, the reporting. All that is not included in the overall costing. So this is an underestimate of the cost. But with the outlay of $1.5 million, then the monthly reduction of $86,000 per month meant that in just the 4 months alone, there was about $360,000 in cost savings. So it would just take 18 months just to get your return on investment. But it's not just the money, the patient outcomes, the length of stay. Every day that a patient stays in hospital is thousands of dollars, right? The patient experience, the readmission rates. So it's all those sort of parameters as well. The biggest result out of this program was the sustainability. So there was this recommendation about sustainability, and only about 6 out of the 11 health services had some sort of ongoing sustainable way of keeping this going. And if you look at cost analysis and clinical costing, there's a lot of discussion that can be had about why it makes good sense, not just in terms of money, but also in terms of patient care to keep this going. There are also some interesting sort of reasons why clinicians ordered unnecessary tests, and that was obviously diagnostic uncertainty, tackling the medical litigation concerns, patient expectations. Education also was highlighted in a very uniform, extensive way, and also heavy workload and routines. So I was talking about us being analysed. It was analysed by the Alpha Crucis group, and this is they used health economists, and they had some really fascinating ways in which they did health economics. But what the lessons we learned from this, and this is within that report, is that clinicians need to be engaged early and frequently. As a surgeon once told me, repetition is the key to success. So all these stories, all these learnings about what is the best test, what is the best management, that needs to be a frequent thing. And these committees need to be chaired by an executive sponsor. And then that's where the accountability comes in. And the clinical leads, if they are resourced, meaning they're given EFT, there's clear accountability. Project managers, there was a bit of discussion about what are the best attributes of a project manager, and should they be clinicians? So a lot of health services had nurses. Should they have project management expertise? Should they be able to do data collection, analysis, stats, and research, and get ethics approvals? Or maybe the ideal one would be that they would be able to do 2 or 3 of these, and that would be fantastic. And then how do you select which low-value care practices are actually the ones that your health service concentrates on? I do remember the discussions initially with the Department of Health, and they the sort of, I guess, dream was, oh, we're going to target CT scans or MRIs, and then we will have this big data set across the state of MRIs and CTs. But hold on a sec, not every health service has a MRI, or not. So, and also by giving them each health service independence and about what they feel is important, I think was critical. And that's where the Austin Health algorithm came in. I've already talked about sustainability, but I repeat it again. The adequate resourcing of project leads and that dedicated time to just sit there and at Austin, we've got 42 departments, and just talk to those departments and think about the evidence and so forth is absolutely remarkable. As a small aside, we looked after an MD student from Melbourne Uni who did a small project looking at heart failure readmission rates. Austin Health, we've got one of the largest cohorts of heart failure patients in the whole state, and indeed the 30-day unplanned readmission rate was very high, so in the order of 20-30%. This student did, again, it's all evidence-based medicine, did research on various factors using a rich data set within our electronic medical record. And with the help of a mathematician, right, created 3 mathematical models. We had all hypotheses like, was it because the patient was home alone? Was it because of the socioeconomic class? But one of the major problems was just that titration of their diuretic at 1 or 2 weeks post-discharge. And that formed the basis of our heart failure clinic, where to prevent that readmission, to choose wisely, to evolve, was based on that sort of real hospital research, which was able to sort of inform some of that. So this is the algorithm. So what happened was, is a recommendation listed by choosing wisely, and the evolved recommendations by the college are all listed on this side as well. Can it be implemented in 12 months? So at that time we had a time factor. Is a recommendation already practiced? Then that's fine. But if it's not, then we have to talk about behaviour change. And then does the recommendation come under the specialty area of a steering committee member? If yes, then we've got someone to lead it. If it doesn't, then it is reviewed by the committee. Again, this whole process of discussion and collaboration is quite important, but this was the framework that we used. So from my hat, in terms of looking after medical education at Austin Health, I was really keen to get students and junior medical staff involved. And the reason being is that their grassroots enthusiasm and drive was incredible. They knew what vertical and horizontal integration meaning you learn from above and below, but you learn from your peers as well. And these were our clinicians at the coalface. These are also going to be our future clinicians. And also, if you get a medical student and you, I guess, mold them with the right type of choosing wisely or evolve principles, then they bring that principle with them throughout their whole training. But it needs faculty, it needs organisation, it needs senior support, and it needs nurturing. So this photo down here is the Melbourne Uni MD conference. It's the largest medical student conference in the Southern Hemisphere. But of course, to engage students, to engage clinicians and junior staff, we had to look and see what the evidence was. So looking in the literature, we used that, it showed that we need to have exposure, we needed awareness, but it's important to tap into existing students and training networks. So in our hospital, we've got the HMO Society. For Melbourne Uni, they've got the medical student societies, and you get champions within those, but also champions within the executive, champions within our senior medical staff, but not just medical, nursing and allied health. And I think one of the really strong points is at our health services is that real true interdisciplinary feel. So I would say something like, or one of our geriatricians would say, who recently did a project on choosing wisely in delirium management and pharmacotherapy. She would say, oh, well, I've got an idea of this, but then our pharmacy would say this, oh, there's another way which we can choose wisely. Why don't we use some of the pharmacy networks? So as you can see, it's quite a very interdisciplinary feel. Curriculum can be, changing the curriculum can be complex, but can be highly rewarding. And be aware of the culture and the hidden curriculum, meaning the ability for students to ask questions. In our grand rounds, both virtual and online and in face-to-face when we had it prior to COVID, we let the medical students ask the first questions. And that sets the tone. On the ward rounds, there's this great process called the stick phenomenon, where you say to the medical students, what would you like to learn on this grand round? Or can I write the notes as a consultant and you lead the ward round if they're happy doing that? So that culture, that very flat hierarchy, if you can get it, is fantastic. And obviously research. All our BPTs and physician trainees and advanced trainees have to do research, and it's a fantastic thing. And the Choosing Wisely on Evolve project is a very nice short project for them to do. So some of the activities which you can find on this website, but also ones that we've looked at, are the ones I've mentioned. And you can link that into the audit and feedback which takes place in the hospital as well. We try and get students and JMS on many of the hospital committees so that you link it in with the executive and administration. And there's so much to learn from each other. And the Choosing Wisely or Evolve actually allows you an excuse to question upwards. And I had this same sort of process even when during COVID time. So my first COVID patient was in ICU. I was on call as a gastroenterologist. Patient was COVID positive and needed a gastroscopy for GI bleeding. And you know what? My intern and my registrar asked me, how will your gastroscopy change management? Have you considered anything else? What is the goal of doing this gastroscopy? What are the goals of care of this patient who is quite unwell with multi-organ failure? And why did you decide on this treatment compared to others? So I was worried about me not being fit tested for my N95 mask, but indeed, the real question was, what's best for the patient? And if we do this everywhere, even if we just do it, if this is a take-home slide, just get all your juniors to ask these questions, then I think we've done a fantastic thing. Of course, we set the scene at orientation with various badges and so forth, and the 5 questions. And our library have produced informatics, which are real snippets of information that you can just read on the fly. So various things like using magnesium or AF, minimum retest, how often should you order a CRP, IV versus twice daily PPIs, opiates, how do you use them? So very common sort of scenarios. I did a project as a gastroenterologist on PPIs, and it's one of the most overprescribed medications in the community and in the hospital. And we did posters and so forth. But then we realized that you can put 1,000 of these posters up in the hospital, but still behavior may not necessarily change. You can make a whole algorithm of when to use PPIs and when to deprescribe and so forth, to base it on evidence and so forth. But again, what we did was then we decided to actually put in our electronic ordering system, put a suggestion. So this is for coagulation studies. So if you order coags at Austin, they say, no, you can't order coags, but have a think about the 4 tests that coags is made up and see if you can follow guidelines. So you order coags, and all of a sudden it tells you exactly what INR, APTT, and the rest of it actually means and what it does. So it's this education on the run with decision support, right? And this got one of our MD students, actually Melbourne Uni medical students, thinking, and they started collating this live document on an MD student guide on choosing wisely. And it was great. They insisted on putting things like number needed to treat and number needed to harm, which I think is incredibly useful. We had quite a few trainees, not just medical, but in fact, one of our residents does a podcast called Humorous Hacks. It's fascinating stuff. You can get it on Apple iTunes. But Purple Pens is something our pharmacy did. And again, making it fun to learn about various things while you're sort of riding to work or driving to work. You can put in your headphones, listen to a podcast, get some choosing wisely sort of pearls of wisdom as you go along. And the other thing that I found, or that we found was quite useful, is that to link it in with the executive and administrative team, but aligning it to things like national standards, but not only that, but the strategy and the value of each health service. So this is our sort of values in terms of our health service, and you can see that that cycle of reflection, learning, and choosing wisely really links in well to a lot of the values that many health services have. If we concentrate on this excellence in teaching, learning, and supervision, I'll show you what the next thing we did. So what we did was, as medical lead of the clinical education unit looking after medical education, I was privy to a lot of sentinel event root cause analyses type meetings and outputs. But I was seeing that, how do you feed back all these really important learnings back to those at the coalface in a very timely fashion, right? So so that you can learn. And a lot of them had choosing wisely messages like goals of care, or don't ignore the vital signs which go off. Cognitive biases, which can be that come from looking at various situations, exceptions to the rule. And so it's based on the principle of case-based micro-teaching, but we started to disseminate, and we're disseminating these through things like round round intern teaching. And these are some of the results we got back. They loved it, absolutely, because it was case-based. It happened at the health service. It was realistic. And then they said stuff like, oh, now I understand why hospital guidelines are important. And with the advent of us rolling out Microsoft Teams in record time because of COVID, we now have on our iPhones or mobile devices, we have the full hospital guidelines at 2-3 clicks of a button. So that means if I want to know about atrial fibrillation, our local guidelines, antibiotic guidelines, treatment of Clostridium difficile, anything, it's all there. And so then it started to dawn on me that in the group that indeed there are other ways that people learn. A lot of people learn through, for example, Twitter, which collates their learning. There's a lot that that also learn through Facebook and YouTube and so forth. However, they weren't secure. We did some initial research where we we did some initial research in terms of trying to do this within a learning management system, which was andragogic based. However, there was difficulties. But now that we've got Microsoft Teams and everyone is on Microsoft Teams, it is indeed a very opportune moment. And so this is our Choosing Wisely committee. And you can see things like climate change, which is a Choosing Wisely and Evolve sort of initiative as well. So climate change is very important. Again, you can start discussing things. And in Microsoft Teams within the hospital, it's under the secure firewall. So it's got the security measures in place. So for now we can start discussing complex patients. Patients who've been there for 20, 30 days or 40 days or 6 months or even a year, right? We know, we've all got them. We've all got the complex patients. And that collaborative type practice is, I think, starting to creep in. And this is where the real opportunity comes. These are some of the things we learned as we decided to use social learning and facilitating that. If you're facilitating a social discussion, again, always be respectful, but moderate fairly. But it's about the stories that really shape it. It's about engaging. You need champions to cultivate and amplify various important messages. Be mindful of the learners, because sometimes there's quiet ones which can you may need to reach out to. This is just a snapshot of, we started running Covert grand rounds, and we just released it to our international partners, including our Pacific Islanders. And in this grand round, as you can see, that we had a lot coming from around the world. And the richness, the international perspective and national perspective you get from that is absolutely incredible. I'm part of the ANSGTA group, which is the Gastroenterology International Training Association. That they host the biggest, in terms of largest area, webinars in the whole world. They cover the whole of the Pacific Island countries. I used to do a bit of volunteer work there in Suva, and basically, if you're interested, come join us. This is the website. You can see these countries. A lot of them are very resource poor, but if you ever work in some of these hospitals, they choose wisely. They really evolve in a very, very clinical way. If you want to learn real clinical medicine, you just spend maybe a few months in one of these wards and you get the best clinical medicine ever. They heard murmurs and vegetations that I would only dream to hear, right? So their clinical acumen is just spot on. And so I learned just as much as I gave when I taught them endoscopy there. So do have a look. The other way to drive this is also to get the juniors to start doing research, which I'm just reading some of the questions, so please do keep the questions open. Yes, I had to run sharing with through our lawyers and through legal in terms of opening up grand rounds, and I had to get special permission. What I did say at the start of every grand round is that there are international and GP partners in our audience, and we also have a consumer in audience as well. And I think it's a great thing because it really gives us a different perspective. So for our juniors, they love to publish as part of their love of research, but also for their CV. And so these are some of the sort of outputs done by medical students who then became interns, for example. Urine cultures, chest X-rays, how often does it change management? The real evolve and choosing wisely principles. I won't go through these studies, but so the top tips there are that indeed think about the governance of your education, think about multiple avenues, make sure you do integrate the students and junior staff into your committee structures, and there are certainly real opportunities in social learning research and innovation. And then if you combine that with the usual supervision. So every time I'm a professional development advisor and also an educational supervisor for the college for my BPTs. I always mention evolve and choosing wisely when we have a bit of a, well, now it's a virtual cup of coffee, but when we used to have those cups of coffees. So the next part of my talk, I'm going to talk about some of the new exciting research that we're doing with adaptive learning platforms. So AKA virtual patients, right? So this came about because, remember, I don't know if you guys remember your choose your own adventure sort of books. You get to choose your own, and you learn by doing that experiential learning. And what you can do with a lot of these platforms is you can fast track those who already know, and then allow those others to make mistakes with virtual patients, not real patients. Could have some lessons for mandatory training. Imagine that if you had to do your hand hygiene certificate, instead of doing the whole course, you could just fast track if you already know how to do it, because we've been doing it very well actually for the last year. We use this Smart Sparrow platform. Indeed, this is part of the BEST network, which is a $4.5 million initiative from the department. But this component of it was you were able to allow different pathways in real-time dynamic mapping. They were also accessible anywhere on any device, which is also very important. So this is this, for example, is a learner, and they make various decisions along the way. And you can see here, if at some point there's at the second point where there are sort of choose your own adventures, only 4 interns have got it correct. But I'll show you some more screenshots later on from our data. So, but the whole premise is that you can actually track where participants actually had pitfalls in either their cognitive decision making, or whether they've got biases in terms of ordering a particular test or doing a particular management. So we wanted to develop these and also explore the efficacy and engagement of this sort of choose your own adventure virtual patients. And we wanted to do it with complex clinical reasoning in our junior medical staff and medical students as well. So writing a choose your own adventure book is a lot of work. So and then programming it is also a lot of work. I am talking hours and hours and hours. So so we wanted to first explore it manually, meaning like do focus groups, develop it, then we do a randomized mixed methods crossover trial, which we've just completed the data collection. So let me tell you about this. So the first thing was that Simone Elliott at Melbourne Uni actually does a sort of choose your own adventure type program for our medical students. And this was a gastrointestinal bleeding case, very common, very important. I know, I'm a gastroenterologist. And these students divided into 11 groups and decided how to manage this patient in terms of history, examination, and management. And they liked it. They loved the overall method of learning. They loved the interaction and it was a manual adaptivity at that time. So basically, I would sit at the computer and I would choose if they ordered a test, I would flick it back to them on a chat. If they ordered a management, I would flick the result to them. And you sort of follow this sort of Excel spreadsheet, right? And it met their learning needs, and they really liked it. But what I took home was that at the end, we gave them feedback on how much money they spent. And you can see one group spent over $1,400 and another group just spent $238. And interestingly, the group that spent $238, the patient did really, really well. And the one that spent the most, unfortunately, the patient could have been managed a bit better. But again, this is a safe simulation environment. It's not about, it's about learning and the growth mindset. And so, but it was really interesting. That's if you wanted to talk about the money, then that what we found from a statewide collaboration is also is also reflected here. And then how did you feel avoiding unnecessary investigations? And again, it was a bit of a spread there. And a lot of them thought that it was going to change their future clinical practice. But the real goal was actually, and they were really interested in getting more scenarios, but the real goal was actually asking them, well, what do you want? They loved it. It was a great experience. It was cool. It was new. It was engaging. They want more. They want more complex stuff. and they wanted a budget. These med students wanted a budget, but that's fine. And they wanted a situational judgment, and they wanted to make it real, and they wanted some video. So here we are. We were going to get ready to do this project, and we had a collaboration with Behaviour Works, which also got a $1.5 million grant from BMIA, Victoria Medical Insurance, and they had a very it was almost entering a movie set. So they set up in our sim lab, and they had everything. It was like, yeah, if ever you went to Movie World, it's like going to one of those theaters. And you could actually, on the video, choose, you'll be talking like as a first person game to, say, the nurse or the doctor or the resident, registrar, consultant, and you get to choose, right, what your options are on what to do. This was on escalation of care, so a really sick patient, what do you do? And so we sort of looked around, learned from all of this, and we created a video on delirium. So I know in the questions there was, can you talk about a case? I love cases. So this is a case of a 68-year-old lady, had a fall on her head, very common scenario. Usual comorbidities, diabetes, COPD, osteoarthritis, and the patient is asked to see the patient for restlessness. And this is what we set up a virtual sort of case, and they say, what would you do next? And so the residents or the intern or the HMO or the med student who's doing this virtual patient would sort of chart their sort of response. And we give them a time limit, as you can see here. The time limit actually makes that too long.
Hi, Jean. How are you today? I brought you your favourite cookies. So sorry to hear about what happened. How's the head? How's the head doing? That looks like a nasty bump. You okay, Jean? I brought you your toiletry bag. What? Your toiletry bag. I brought that for you. Dad forgot that. And I let go, Jean. No, Jean, let go. Let go. Mom, let go. Are you all right, Jean? What's going on? Are you okay? No, Jean. No, let go. Oh, Jean, are you all right? Jean, are you okay? Jean, oh, no, but Jean, don't do that. Oh, Jean, are you all right? Jean, are you all right, Jean? Careful, Jean, what's going on?
I'm just going to ask you a few questions and see how you go. All right? Do you have any pain?
Okay, so that was a case of delirium, and delirium is a evolve and choosing wisely recommendation, and about the appropriate management of delirium. And as you can see, like, you can give a lecture about delirium and say, do this and do that, and don't do this and don't do that. But you can see here, that's a patient experience of what delirium is. And that was filmed in our sim lab. That was actually a nurse who was doing the acting. That was a real resident actually doing that. And you can see, indeed, that the lot of our interns and residents, and even some of our more senior staff said, "Oh, actually, I never realised that delirium. They actually saw that. That's why they're all with an agitated delirium. That's why they sort of appear to be doing what they're doing." And so, and recognising things like pain and reversible causes like fecal impaction and urinary retention, and don't just use excessive benzodiazepines, and the fact that 1/3 is preventable, and that mortality increases 11% for every 48 hours that it's not recognised. So that whole process of adding video certainly was something that we learned had its value. But of course, we had this video all planned, all these videoing all planned, and COVID hit. So now I'll give you the ups and downs of doing research in the COVID period. And so we went on to do our crossover feasibility trial, randomized, and we chose 2 topics. One is, acute gastrointestinal bleeding, which is, close to my heart too, and also acute colitis, which is close to my heart too. We created an adaptive version where you could choose your own adventure with these patients. And what we learned is that the problem with choose your own adventure is that you can branch off. If you have 5 choices, and each of those 5 choices are 5 choices, and each of those 5 choices, you get an increasingly large number of choices. So what we started to do, so I started reading those choose your own adventure books and found out what you do is you actually bring them back. So if someone's going off the garden path and doing all types of investigations, CT, pan scan, serum rhubarb, investigation A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? You bring them back by bringing in the wise old registrar or consultant who's a choosing wisely champion who gently nudges them back to, the right path or the most evidence-based path, right? So we found really nice, interesting ways to do that within these scenarios. We made them complex. They were interns or HMOs looking after multiple patients with multiple competing interests, right? And of course, we gave them time limits. And because medical students and juniors love exams, we gave them an MCQ exam 4 weeks afterwards to see how much of the principles that they retained, right? And not only that, we gave them a user engagement scale at those time points. So as you can see, they go adaptive, they get the assessment a bit later, so that there's that latency effect to allow them to forget it. Then they do their non-adaptive, then they get assessed, or they actually do it the other way around. So of course, we couldn't do videos because we're all socially distanced. So that was sort of struck off the methodology. But that didn't mean we couldn't make it interactive. So these are some screenshots. Again, the resident has to choose which page to answer first. They were given options in terms of blood transfusions. We asked that they got to ask various questions, and then the patient would answer, the virtual patient would answer. We got them to free text a few things. We also asked how confident they are with their answers. So if they're very confident and they're choosing the wrong, the less evidence-based test or management, then that's also telling, and that can inform how we sort of provide future education. We made our pathology test as realistic as possible, what it looked like. This would be a manual ordering for pathology. We have subsequently developed things like actual Cerner or electronic ordering sort of systems. And again, you get that sort of, for example, so the bad thing about COVID was we couldn't do the videos, but the good thing about COVID was that ethics was really, we had a good collaborative discussion with ethics, a very long discussion with ethics with multiple applications. And we said, well, given the students can't come to hospitals, the medical students, but they really want learning, ethically, I would love to distribute these clinical cases to all the clinical schools, all 12 Melbourne Uni clinical schools. And they said, yes. We put in amendments and stuff. They said, yep. And so it went to 203 participants. We never dreamed of that number of participants. And an interesting thing is, because it was during COVID, we only had 1 withdrawal, which is incredible, actually. So this is the largest sort of cohort looking at virtual patients to our knowledge. And you can see here, if you just look at, for example, one of the various students, we did a little pilot on the trace graphs. You can do it with lots of students, but if I put lots of students in, it would just look very complex and messy. But you can see where they got sort of things right, where they came back, the little choose your own pathway that they took. You can see also what bloods and investigations are actually particularly over-ordered. Like, why are they doing a tox screen, or why are they measuring cholesterol in an acute patient, for example? How many are doing that? And you can sort of target it in a general sort of teaching way. Again, it's all about learning, not about blaming or belittling. It's a very collaborative learning environment. Anyway, the data is still being analysed, and as you may be aware, there are reams and reams of data that's been outputted. Every single point where they make a decision, there's a data set. So we're getting our mathematicians to help us again. But while we wait for that, I did for tonight pull out this one. As you can see, one strong thing is, would you recommend this tutorial to my peers? And you can see the non-adaptive, they would, because it was a good topic anyway. But adaptive, they really pushed the curve to the right. A lot of them would strongly agree that they would recommend this tutorial to their peers. And the gold, again, came from the themes that came out. A lot of them loved that it was a junior doctor role, that was interactive, that was realistic. It was actually based on what you would see on the wards. And you got that instant feedback. Because as you went to your Choose Your Own Adventure, the registrar came and said, oh, hold on a sec, wait a sec. Do you really want to order that CT PAN scan? Or do you want to order that MSU on a patient with no symptoms? Have a wee think about what you're doing, right? Anyway, it was, but we also really wanted to know about suggestions for improvement. That growth mindset, we're always improving ourselves. So the refinement of feedback for text answers, for example. Loading time was an issue, so we've got to think carefully about what graphics and so forth we put in. Mobile-friendly format. The other thing which happened was this platform, because it's based on Flash, was no longer viable. So they've transitioned now to a platform called Canvas, so we're exploring that. Then there was this fascinating suggestion about using artificial intelligence and machine learning. So just before COVID hit, I went to Hong Kong when they had the when they had the riots and the protests. There was a huge influx of patients, both police and protesters, into the office, into the ED departments there. And I got a glimpse into their smart hospitals. So they would use artificial intelligence. So you would have all these people in ED with X-rays of various types. Let's take chest X-rays, for example. So most of these chest X-rays were done for, say, chest infections or trauma or fractured ribs. And there'll be 2,000 of them, chest X-rays to be reported. But the machine learning, the AI, would learn which ones of these looked abnormal. Didn't have to say what it was, but they got pretty good at that too. And they would put those at the front of the queue. So the radiologist reporting would then be able to report the abnormal ones first. So there you use artificial intelligence to actually help you choose wisely or to evolve. And not only that, as the residents or interns were writing their admission notes in Hong Kong, and this was in one pilot site, it was fascinating. They would be writing their admission notes and then they'll put impressions, community-acquired pneumonia, right? And that was state severity. And then bang, the little AI bot would say, hey, would you like to follow this guideline and use this antibiotic? And maybe even pre-fill it's and then of course they wouldn't do the job of the clinician, but they would make suggestions based on the current evidence. So that loop of learning that and so I was thinking through that, and obviously it fits in very well on how we can sort of do it in a hospital system, that reflection practice, the feedback, deliberate practice, right? So one of the members of my research group actually used to work for Telstra, and another one also, we've also got some expertise at Austin where people have gone to MIT and they're really good at AI, right? And bots and everything. So I said, how about do a bot? So when you on a website, just say you're on the Telstra website and the little chat box comes up, right? The chat box, there's not a person, it's an AI, it's a bot, right? So I said, well, why don't we make a patient bot? So this is my resident Luke, who's an AI guru, and we've just partnered with IBM and Microsoft. So we've now got an innovation hub. So we've got access to the latest AI tech, and it's really exciting. And our dream is that eventually hubs across the state will get together and start doing really innovative technological stuff in the space of education and learning. But anyway, so he goes, hey, my name is Luke. I'm helping you. Can you help me? What seems to be the issue? I'm experiencing chest pain. See, the green bit is the bot. This is all AI generated. And whatever you ask it, it interprets the key words in what you're asking, even if there's spelling mistakes, right? And answers your questions. Say how long the chest pain is it in the middle of my chest, is it crushing? all that sort of stuff. It takes a while to program, I can tell you that. But the back end, you can see, you can actually preview it. It's see how it works with Google Assistant, and this new frontier for the next phase in sort of virtual patients. Of course, we'll see what our current project shows, but I think there's some real opportunities here in terms of hospital systems, but also in education. In the last few minutes, I know I've gone for a while, but there is a real opportunity. Austin is looking after this Northeast corridor. So this is Melbourne. We're looking after the Northeast Public Health Unit, which is in order of about 500 to 1 million people there. And it really opened. I'm part of the Health Literacy Committee in the Health Service, and we were thinking, well, wouldn't it be just a fantastic way to actually think about some choosing wisely or evolve messages? Because any person in the public, in the waiting room, having a COVID vaccine, which hopefully will be the vast majority of everyone, hopefully, in the population, they'll be waiting 15 minutes after their COVID vaccine. So we took an opportunity to survey a whole vast clinicians and community providers and so forth. This was about 400 people who attended one of our grand rounds this year to and asked them about what would be good to put him onto one of these videos on the TV screens, which normally just plays some sort of soapy or something else, as an opportunity, as a public health initiative opportunity. And so there were a lot of themes, and I've sort of summarized them, but obviously COVID-19 messages are very important, but also things like smoking cessation, diet and exercise, mental health and well-being, screening programs. And screening programs, if you want to talk about choosing wisely involved, is actually very, very important. There's a recent article which came out which says that approximately 8,000 bowel cancers will be diagnosed because people have delayed their fecal occult blood testing during the COVID year. It's not just bowel cancers, other types of cancers as well, and not quite seeking help for their symptoms. So there's already some videos which are available for that. And this is some of the bowel cancer work that I've been involved with the ABC. But we decided to think about a governance structure for this, and it's very important. Every hospital will have its own governance structure, but then we realised that it does need that. Again, a Choosing Wisely or Evolve committee would be very useful in this process, plus the Health Literacy Committee. And there's our Indigenous groups are also very important. Our Indigenous project officer has been amazing. So to really engage various non-English speaking groups or Indigenous groups, actually having that that direct communication is very important. Of course, these can be researched, and this is some of the surveys you can do that other health services have done. This leads me to my sort of final slide. So today we've talked about a lot of things. There's clinical education and the Evolve process. There's incredible benefits to the patients, and that's what we've got to always remember what this is for. But also the staff in the health service. It often needs to be a multi-pronged approach. So if you look at, I went through a lot of different articles to look at what works and what doesn't work. But often when it doesn't work, it's not necessarily because that particular thing didn't work. It often worked a little bit, but it needed something else. Remember the organisational structures and the critical role really of executive sponsorship in this process. Sustainability was the really big thing that came out from the statewide rollout, and also the resourcing of clinical leads and the project officer. And indeed, for a large health service, the project officer really should be nearly approaching full time, and the clinical leads often it's 1 or 2 free sessions depending on how big the health service is. The financial benefits are not always obvious, but they are real. The reduction in tests is a really good question in that about how do we know it was because of choosing wisely? And often these studies are designed as pre during and post-test intervention, and that's where you see the drop in testing rates. Of course, yes, it could be biased because of other sort of factors, but if there's large enough numbers, then the intervention and you've looked at confounders, then you can make some sort of relationship type of statement. Virtual patients and artificial intelligence have flexibility, but you can also roll it out in a large scale. And social learning calibrations are really tantalizing opportunities. This is our hepatitis B campaign, which is, as you can see on my left, that's the jade ribbon. And you can see the students and the interns and HMOs, they are really a source of fantastic enthusiasm, to the point where they made a little video, which I'll close with. Before I do that, I'd like to obviously acknowledge the multiple grants which made this possible, plus our clinical leads and project leads, as well as my MD students and our virtual patient team, which we often meet at late hours because the hospital's been so busy. But here's the video that the students made.
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Less is more can often be the best way. Yeah, test treatments and procedures you don't really need. While some are very useful, some have been mislead. Now we're choosing wisely. And you will advance can do more harm than good. We're choosing wisely. Imaging for minor things that may not give you the truth. We're choosing wisely. Antibiotics for a cold will do nothing but make it ill. We're choosing wisely. Screen for many things is often overkill. Come on, wanna keep you free from harm. And test result can cause alarm. The treatment makes you feel run down. The drug can spin you round and around. I said, wanna keep you free from harm. With that procedure, you wear a hospital gown. But nothing can be you lucky charm. We wanna keep you. I said, tell you now. Understand, and you will advance can do more harm than good. We're choosing wisely. Imaging for minor things that may not give you the truth. We're choosing wisely. Antibiotics for a cold.
Yeah, so absolutely that get up and dance, because get excited about evolving, choosing wisely, because it really is so important. I'm open to questions. Feel free to put it in the chat or the Q&A, depending on which has been open to you. I'm just reading out a few of them. Could you give an example of real case-based micro discussion? So just this week, on the patient came in with back pain and had red flags for spinal cord compression, and or they could have a red flag for fracture, for example. And there's a great study which was done looking at, well, often they go to X-ray, then they go to CT, then MRI. But the choosing wisely thing would be, well, actually the right test, if it's, for example, maybe a MRI or CT, if you're really thinking about issues with fracture or even spinal cord compression. So seeing that really short, or patient having severe abdominal pain, but the abdominal findings are not all that, there's no guarding the abdomen, but it's very severe abdominal pain, requiring lots of analgesics. Then the learning point is that, well, maybe it's retroperitoneal, maybe we've got a burst AAA or dissection. And the imaging for that is not an abdo X-ray, but in fact it's a CT. So again, it's not about not ordering tests, but it's ordering the right test. So that's where, in that sort of 1 minute micro teach, you can sort of pull the stuff that comes from sentinel events and actually use it as a teaching episode on the ward round. And then I've talked about the legalities before. Yep. So any other questions? Sorry, I've ran a little bit over time, but as a gastroenterologist, get a bit of verbal diarrhea and excitement. Yeah, so the question about how was it determined that the clinician deliberately didn't order the test after having become aware of choosing wisely? So that I suspect they're talking about the Hawthorne effect. In fact, part of what we learned when we sort of collaborated with Behaviour Works, which is looking at behaviour, is indeed a lot of this is that sort of process of changing behaviour. And in emergency, one of our emergency leads actually, they actually got all the juniors and consultants got sort of feedback about their ordering type habits compared to the rest of the cohort. And if you're in the top sort of percentage that we're ordering a lot of tests, you weren't, you got that live feedback. You say, have a think about why you're ordering so many MSUs, or why you're ordering. Look, it may not be wrong. We're not saying it's not inappropriate, but that auditing process and continued data and feedback, I think, is quite important. Obviously, keep evolving and choosing wisely. And thanks for listening tonight.